Redemption, Lesson 7. This is the progression of redemption. We're almost finished the progression, not quite. Now, to get the most out of this lecture, you'd do well to just sit down and read through the book of Ruth first. It's only 4 short chapters. It's a wonderful love story, and if you just sit down and read through it, it'll give you an overall picture, and it'll save me having to read the whole thing as we go. So if you do that first, that's definitely the way to go. But then I'll go on with the lecture from here. This book of Ruth is a story of redemption. It's a love story, and it's a story of redemption. And redemption is always a love story. I want you to get that in your mind. Redemption is always a love story. And so, this is what happens. Now, it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land, this is the land of Israel, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. And the name of the man was Elimelech, the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah, and they came into the country of Moab and continued there. Right, so there was a man named Elimelech. Now, Elimelech means God of the King. So that's an interesting name, isn't it? And let's get a clear idea here too that names mattered in the Jewish culture. They mattered a great deal, and that's the name of Elimelech, God of the King, and he lives at Bethlehem. Bethlehem where Jesus was born. Now there's a reason that it's Bethlehem where Jesus was born, because the descendants that come from Elimelech, of them, one of them is David, and he's the ancestor of Christ. And he lives at Bethlehem. Now, what does Bethlehem mean? Well, Beth in Hebrew means the house of, and Bethlehem means the house of bread. So what do we know about Bethlehem? It was a place where food was plentiful. And Ephratah, that's another name for Bethlehem, and it means fruitfulness. So that's a good place, isn't it? The house of bread, a place of fruitfulness. And Elimelech is married to a woman named Naomi. Now, Naomi means pleasant. So it's all sounding good, isn't it? And they have 2 sons. Right, the name of one was Mahlon, and Mahlon means sick. Now that doesn't sound so good, does it? And they had another son, and his name was Chilion, and Chilion means pining. It actually means consumption. Now, we call this thing called consumption, we call that tuberculosis. And so we know that these 2 sons were sick. They were not well. They were not healthy in any way at all. But they survived, which was unusual in those days, and they grew up. And then there's a famine in the land of Judah, and so Elimelech takes his wife and family to live in Moab. Now, Moab is a neighbouring state, and the Moabites are related to the Israelites. We see that back in Genesis 19. And the Moabites were happy enough to have Elimelech and Naomi and the family come and live there. And so they live in Moab for 10 years. It says, and Elimelech's, well, they came to the country of Moab and continued there. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died while they were there. But before he died, his two sons married. One marries Ruth, and Ruth means friend. So that's a nice name, and if she lives by her name, and we'll see that she does, we like Ruth. The other one, Chilion, he marries Orpah. Now her name means mane, like the mane on a lion, that's on a lion's neck, and her name has to do with the neck. Now you think that's a funny name? All right, well it is in a way, but it means one who is stiff-necked. And so it has to do with the idea of being obstinate. And so that's her. That doesn't sound quite so good, does it? And then we see that Elimelech dies, so that's sad for Naomi. And then Mahlon dies, and that's very sad. And then Chilion dies, so that's very sad for Naomi. So Naomi is left with two daughters-in-law and no descendants to pass the inheritance on to. And you say, what inheritance? They've got nothing. Well, Elimelech, despite his absence in Moab, still had an inheritance back home, right? Because it's perpetually his by inheritance. No doubt because of the famine, he had come to poverty and sold his land, but it was still the family's right to redeem that land at any time and take possession of it again. But now Naomi has a real problem. She has no sons now and only daughters-in-law. This could be remedied if she had more sons, but we see that this is not possible. Ruth 1, 11 to 13 tells us, and Naomi said, "Turn again, my daughters." Now, what's happened here? Naomi has decided that she's going to go back to where she came from. We'll see verse 6. Then she arose, this is Naomi, with her daughters-in-law, that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. In other words, the famine was over. Wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her two daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return unto the land of Judah. And Naomi said unto her two daughters-in-law, Go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as ye have dealt with the dead and with me. And the Lord grant you that you may find rest, each of you in the house of her husband. So she's saying, the Lord grant that you might find rest, that you might find a husband and be married again and live a life of your own back home. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said unto her, Surely we will return with thee unto thy people. And Naomi said, Turn again, my daughters, why will you go with me? Are there yet any more sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. And if I should say I have hope, and if I should have a husband also tonight, and should also bear sons, would ye tarry for them till they were grown? Would ye stay for them from having husbands? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me. And so she knows the law of Israel, and if she had more sons, then they could marry Ruth and Orpah and have children. But no, that couldn't happen, and Naomi sees that this situation is hopeless, and so it changes her whole attitude to life. But we see that the daughters lifted up their voice and wept, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave unto her. And when it says Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, it means she kissed her and she went back to her home and to start a life again back in Moab where she came from. But Ruth clave unto her, and that means that she said, no, I'm going to go with you, I'm not going to leave you. And Naomi said, behold, thy sister-in-law has gone back unto her people and unto her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law. And Ruth said, entreat me not to leave thee or to return from following after thee, for whither thou goest I will go, and where thou lodgest I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. So she proved herself true to her name, didn't she? She's a friend, a true friend. And when Naomi saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left speaking to her. So they two went until they came to Bethlehem. And it came to pass, when they were come to Bethlehem, that all the city, that's the village, but the city of Bethlehem, was moved about them, and they said, is this Naomi? And she said unto them, call me not Naomi, that means pleasant, call me Mara, that means bitterness, for the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me. Right, I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home empty. Why then call ye me Naomi, seeing the Lord hath testified against me, and the Almighty hath afflicted me? So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, which returned out of the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem in the beginning of the barley harvest. Right. So Naomi comes home, and she's bitter, and she says, call me Mara. Change my name from Naomi to Mara, to bitterness. And we see that Ruth and Naomi come to Bethlehem to live once more. Now they're poor and destitute, and more than that too, Ruth is a Moabite, and so she's a foreigner. Now the Moabites were happy enough to accept Elimelech and Naomi and Mahlon and Chilion to come and live with them, but the Jews, they were much more difficult. It was a much more difficult situation for Ruth to come and live with them, because they didn't like foreigners, and they didn't accept foreigners easily, and they didn't give a place to them if they could help it. And so even though God had commanded them under the law that when somebody came, a foreigner or a stranger, that they were to accept them, they didn't really do that. They made it very hard for foreigners. And Ruth and Naomi have got nothing. They can't redeem their land or anything. They own nothing. But under the law, provision is made for them. Ruth is able to go and glean in the fields. Now, if we go and have a look back at Leviticus 19, and this is why the law is so important. It's important for us to understand the law. Leviticus 19. 9 and 10. And it says, and this is a general command to the children of Israel, and when you reap the harvest of your land, thou shalt not wholly reap the corners of the field, neither shalt thou gather the gleanings of thy harvest, and thou shalt not glean thy vineyard, neither shalt thou gather every grape of thy vineyard, thou shalt leave them for the poor and stranger. I am the Lord your God. So God had made provision for the poor and for the strangers in this matter of gleaning. When they went out to reap the wheat and the barley and the rye and to harvest their grapes and their olives and all the fruit, they would to go out and not reap every bit of the field. The corners, they would leave a little bit in the corners. Anything that was dropped in the field, it was to be left there. And the poor and the strangers could come and glean it, carry it, pack it up. It wouldn't be much, and they'd have to work really hard for it, but at least they wouldn't starve. It was enough for each day, day by day. They would go out and glean in the field. They would work all day just to get enough to survive and to live on. And so Ruth was able to go and glean in the fields. And so it says, and Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, a mighty man of wealth, of the family of Elimelech, right, Elimelech her husband, and his name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said unto Naomi, let me now go to the field and glean ears of corn after him, in whose sight I shall find grace. And she said unto her, go, my daughter. And she went and came and gleaned in the field after the reapers, and her hap was to light on a part of the field belonging unto Boaz, who was the kindred of Elimelech. Right. She comes to a field and she begins to glean, and the field happens to belong to Boaz. Now, Boaz, what do we know about him? Well, we already know something about him that makes him a pretty fair sort of a fella. And Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, a mighty man of wealth, of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. So he's a mighty man of wealth, and it's interesting that his name is Boaz, because Boaz, we don't find any special meaning to this name. It's just a name, like we have just names, don't we? My name's Robert, and not Robert for any particular reason. It's because my parents liked that name, so that's what they called me. But under the Jewish system, the parents gave the children's names, and they thought a lot about the name that they gave them, and the name had a meaning. But Boaz, we come to him, and his name's just a name. Well, now, why is this? He's a mighty man of wealth. He's an important fella. Why is his name doesn't mean anything? Well, although Boaz was a mighty man of wealth, he was despised and rejected. Now, this is a very interesting thing. Why was he? Well, let's go over to Matthew 1, the beginning of Matthew, and have a look, because we find out something about him there that makes him a very interesting character. Matthew 1 and verse 15. It says, no, verse 5. It's going through the genealogy of Christ, and it says, and Aram begat Amminadab in verse 4, and Amminadab begot Nason, and Nason begot Salmon, and Salmon begot Boaz, this is who we're talking about, of Rahab, and then it goes on. Now, that means that Boaz, his mother, was Rahab. Now, who was Rahab? Well, she was the harlot from Jericho that was saved because she believed God and was delivered from the destruction of Jericho.